call your father old. If any of my children committed that sin, half of, they'd be in trouble.
Don't worry, George, you can have trouble as well.
Thank you, Ranjit, for the crystal clarity of your introduction, Your Excellencies from the Chinese Embassy, and a special thanks, as you yourself conveyed, to the great people of Venezuela whose embassy makes the use of this auditorium, which is perfect, apart from the signal. We have to try and get a proper signal so we can film live. But the generosity of the Venezuelan embassy in repeatedly making this space available for meetings such as this is really special. There are very few countries in the world, very few embassies in London that would afford this to people like us. Thank you to all of you who've come from far. We personally left home at 4 a.m. this morning, and I know that other people have travelled far also for this auspicious day. And it is auspicious for the reasons that Dr. Ranjit referred. We're celebrating here something truly momentous in the history of humankind. The hunting down and the destruction of the fascist beasts in Berlin.
I'm so sorry, I should have done this earlier.
Is one of the greatest achievements of humankind. If it were not, been successful, none of us would have been here. Many of us would have been put to death as Untermensch, subhumans. Those of us who survived and who developed anti-fascist ideas would be in concentration camps, gas chambers, liquidated. And those who did not would still be living under the iron heel of fascism. Imagine that. Imagine, it's easier for me, I was born in the shadow of the end of the Second World War. Don't tell my wife, she thinks I'm 45. I was born just 9 years after the end of the Second World War. People were still being gassed in extermination camps just 9 years before I was born. And it would have continued if not for the Allied victory, an alliance which we celebrate here today. All the countries in the alliance make different contributions, militarily and in terms of the death toll. There is no doubt that the then USSR played the decisive role. Churchill himself repeatedly said so on the floor of the House of Commons. That the Red Army, he said, under Generalissimo Joseph Stalin, had broken the back of the Wehrmacht. Broken the back of the German armed forces. 8 in every 10 of the Nazi personnel destroyed in the war were destroyed on the Eastern Front by the Red Army and by the partisans working heroically behind enemy lines. Nowhere more so than in Ukraine. And whilst I shall say some very harsh things about Ukraine in the course of my words, we will never forget the bravery, the sacrifice, the martyrdom of the Ukrainian partisans who gave their lives knowingly to harry and sabotage and seek to weaken the Nazi occupation of their country. Under pressure not just from the Nazis, but from their hirelings and fellow fascists in the western part of Ukraine on every day of that resistance. Don't forget, I was asking Steve if he'd seen the Netflix documentary, which I commend to all of you, Einsatzgruppen, Hitler's Executioners, on Netflix. You'll thank me for the recommendation. The burden of the genocidal madness in the Eastern Holocaust was carried out not by German Nazis but by Ukrainian Nazis, and from the Baltic states as are now, and indeed from Hungary and Romania. The SS kept the notes, counted the numbers, but the killers were Ukrainian fascists and their allies in the neighborhood. So these Ukrainian partisans were fighting not just the Nazi German forces, but their Ukrainian and other regional counterparts. And they are stakeholders in this great victory that we celebrate here today. Glory to the Ukrainian resistance to fascism in the great patriotic war. Chinese people, how widely this is either forgotten or unknown. The second largest mountain of martyrs to fascism in the entire period starting before the Second World War was the mountain of Chinese people slain. Despite their heroic resistance, helped when it could be by the Soviet Union, and in a desultory way, more desultory way, by the United States and others. But the Chinese people bore the brunt of that fascist onslaught themselves, which created, of course, the crucible in which was formed the mighty, great, eternal People's Republic of China. It stands now as an, I don't know if I should laugh, but I do laugh. I laugh at the impotent rage of imperialism, at the unstoppability of the Chinese people. Nothing they can do, no sanction they can level, no threat that they can make, no slander they can issue, can stop the rise and rise and rise of the People's Republic of China. And they know that's why their hatred is so impotent and vicious. Because they know that there is nothing that can be done. In the great words of the Chinese leader, responding to comments made by His Royal Highness Prince Charles when he was lecturing the Chinese people on what they must do for democracy in Hong Kong. A democracy entirely absent through the 150 years of British rule in Hong Kong, where no one had a vote for anything. or anyone. The Chinese response was the days when China could be ordered by foreigners are over. And over they are. And of course, our own people, who made enormous sacrifice also, economic as well as fighting sacrifice to the victory in the Second World War. For a time when the Americans were watching on newsreel, working out which way it was going to go, our people stood alone. Our people stood alone against Hitler. Despite the fifth column. We call it fifth column, but it was kind of a four-fifths column who wished to surrender and make a deal with Hitler. But it was the patriotic section of the British bourgeoisie which existed, and the ranks of the labour movement, the trade unions, and then the Labour Party, which then at least had some connection with the name Labour, if only in a deformed way. Men like Bevan, Mr. Foote, with whom I discussed those days so many times around the table in his favourite Soho restaurant, the Gehuza, the Hungarian. He used to invite me there because I liked to hear him talk for hours about the period of appeasement, the resistance to appeasement, and how finally Britain stood up to fascism. And our soldiers, two of whom were my grandfathers, both in the same regiment, the Highland Division of the 8th Army under Montgomery, fighting in El Alamein, and even worse, fighting at Monte Cassino in Italy, an experience from which neither ever fully recovered. One of my grandfathers in particular had nightmares about Monte Cassino for all of the years of his life after the war, crying out in the night. Our people, our armed forces, our heroes on the Atlantic convoys, half of whom did not survive, supplying the Soviet Union in the icy seas, menaced by U-boats, being lost overboard, being sunk, being attacked from above. The heroes of the Atlantic convoys cry out from their watery graves, "We will never hate Russia. We will never agree to hate the Russians. Never." We gave our lives so that the Russian people could have the means of fighting war against fascism, so that they could have the food for their families to eat on the home front. We will never agree to hate Russia. And in particular, this is controversial, and I'm not speaking for the Workers' Party in this. I will never hate Russia, and I'll never love Germany, and I'll never love Japan, because I know too much about what happened in that period. The idea that I should love Germany and hate Russia, or hate China and love Japan, no thanks, count me out. I'll leave that to you younger, more enlightened, woke generation that are coming up so fast after me. This period, I stress to you, would have gone on and on and on Hitlerism, Japanese fascism, Italian fascism would have gone on and on unless it had been stopped. And we say glory to all of those American, British, Soviet, Chinese partisans all over the world that fought fascism. Glory to the resistance. Now I turn, if I'm not outstaying my welcome and my allotted time, to more contemporary events. This day, in fact. This day, the government in Berlin issued an edict forbidding the carrying of any Soviet flags in the commemorations today and tomorrow of the end of the Second World War. Soviet flags, which cleansed Germany of Hitler fascism, which destroyed the beast in the rubble of Berlin, which in the most iconic photograph of all history was hoisted over the Reichstag roundabout this day in 1945. Germany will be arrested if you raise it. Russian property is being attacked. Russian icons being attacked. Russian journalists, just in the last few days, almost fell victim to a terrorist attack in Berlin, all but unprotected by the German state. Even dead Russians, even Russians that died long before the Soviet Union existed, composers, painters, writers, banned, or at least postponed until new circumstances arise. This madness, this Russophobic madness is mounting in official circles and in their media echo chamber. But here's my second controversial point. I think it's wearing thin amongst the population.
Yes.
I think the population to sense that this narrative is not actually all that it cracks up to be. I pray in aid only anecdotal evidence, because I've been in this kind of a movie before, in the run-up to the Iraq War, and in the immediate aftermath of it. It wasn't safe for me to go out on the street. I could show you my scars, literally. I was faced with ferocious hatred from ordinary people at the time of the Iraq. I mean, they couldn't strike Saddam Hussein, so they struck me instead. I had a mustache in those days. That's what it was like. The Sun was trying to prosecute me for treason. They had a fund on the front page, donate for a private prosecution of me. The section of the act was incitement to disaffection. I told them, put that on my gravestone. He incited them. But I I'm out everywhere, all the time. And not one person, of course online, coward's way. But in real life, IRL, I think the young people call it. IRL. It's never happened, no, once. And yet, insofar as the mass media acknowledge my existence at all, they acknowledge it as an agent of Putin and Russia and all the other foolish appellations. So that's my first anecdotal evidence. My comrade, Jyoti, her husband's barber, piped up while shaving him a week or two ago. He brought up, I'm not so sure, he said, that what they're telling us about this Ukraine story is right. And I hear these stories now coming from all of my comrades, all over the country. People, for two reasons. First of all, they realize that when you've got a political class that are such liars, they can't even get a story straight about whether they were there or not there, whether they ate a cold curry or a hot one, whether they touched the birthday cake or not. A political class that is absolutely mendacious, and a media that they know has lied to them about everything, from Brexit to Corbyn to all the other lies. So there's that. But there's also this. People are asking, you mean I'm going to be short of food because you want to fight Russia? I'm going to be unable to pay for my petrol or diesel, literally unable to pay it, as it heads inexorably to £10 a gallon, at least by the end of this year. Mark my words, £10 a gallon. That's why they don't price it in gallons anymore. £10 a gallon of petrol, meaning that for large sections of the population, they'll no longer be able to use their motor cars. And for those that don't like motor cars, now that we've destroyed our railway network, everything comes by road, so everything that's moving on the road will have to rise in price because the haulage and distribution costs will rise and rise. People are saying, wait, okay, it's spring now, but winter will come in just 6 months from now. I couldn't pay my last gas bill, which is 54% on average higher than the one before it, and might be 154% more by next winter. You mean I've got to go cold because you want to fight with Russia, one of the world's biggest producers of wheat, of gas, of oil, of nickel, of neon, of fertilizers, all these things we're not allowed to buy. What's that going to do to the supply and to the price of essential commodities and raw materials? So for both those reasons, people are waking up. Here in Britain, which as always lags behind the more militant people of France, who are already on the streets, but also the people of Germany. Irony of ironies. Because of all the countries in Europe that are dependent upon Russian raw materials and commodities, as well as the market for quite a few German manufactured products, are going to be the worst affected of all. And this grotesque government of theirs, with little soldier shows propped up by Am I allowed to say this? What's green about all these warmongering Greens all over the world, in Germany? They want to stop you drinking water out of a plastic bottle, but they're gung-ho for missiles and bombs and attacks and war. What kind of green is that? Is that ravening for war, the Greens in Germany. Little Schultz would probably not be going this far, except he's being kicked by these oh-so feminist, oh-so green party ministers of his. They're absolutely determined that you should use the right pronouns, but not as determined as they are to make war against Russia. Imagine. So, enough for me. You have many outstanding speakers to come. And Comrade Harpal, please forgive me, I have to drive to Bristol. And so we'll miss your address, and I think also yours, Comrade Steve. But I'll see the film that we have made of the event. I thank all of you again for attending this Workers' Party of Britain event. Let's make sure that next year, by the way, a lot of people said to us, you better knock it off, knock it on the head this year. Conditions are not right. We were determined. We will never stop celebrating Victory Day. Glory to those